Welcome back to the Reptiles and Research podcast. Our guest this week is milksnake mutations, who breeds hybrid colubrids, often things in the complex of corn snake to king snake and milk snake to king snake, and making things like the imperials and things like that. Now, this is a conversation that was really, really interesting because I had never really considered hybrid snakes in the same manner we discuss it in this episode. We talk about it in the vein of it being akin to the first steps of domestication, in the same way that in pigs there were 3 species that went into making our domestic pig. The same with dogs, the same with sheep, the same with cattle. And we put the argument across that is that not the same as 3 different species of the tribe Lampropeltini going into our domestic breed, shall we say, or at least being the first step towards domestication. We talk about how Matt from Milksnake Mutations feels, about how other people feel that it's very controversial what he does, and everything in between. This conversation is a conversation that I really enjoyed, and I hope, like, in a world where everything's so polarized and everyone's at each other's throats and there's no in between and it's very tribal and it's us versus them, this lovely meeting in the middle and having a conversation, even though in this conversation we disagree at times. I hope that people listening find this just as refreshing as it was to us taking part in it. Enjoy the episode. Thank you very much for coming, Matt. I'm really excited about this episode, talking about hybrids. But going into this, obviously we know that you do hybrids, but can you just give our listeners a bit of an intro into who you are and like how you came to be doing what you're doing?
Okay, so my name's Matthew. I run under the hobby breeding banner of milksnake mutations. I specialise in generally Lampropelta species, but more leaning towards milksnakes, and then hybrid colubrids as well. So mixing of multiple different genuses to create a different look, basically.
And what drove you to be like, right, hybrids, that's what I want to do?
See, it all actually came from my very, very first got into reptiles. I was at a local pet shop called Scales and Tails in Wigston. And I remember seeing they had a thing called a Pueblo corn. And, I'm talking when I was 14. I looked at this going, Pueblo corn, never heard of that. And the shop owner at the time explained to me, no, it's a crossbreed. This is something you can actually do. And I thought that was mind blowing at the time. Thinking, like, how is this even possible? Didn't realize you could cross species. This is me being a, young, naive keeper. And then as I grew older, obviously got adult money. I figured, like, I'd got a few more animals, and I thought, hybrids are something that's just still interesting to me. I started picking a few up, and then kind of took it from there, really.
Well, when was the first time that you were like, right, I want to go into like hybrids, like heavily?
So I, as I was building up, my breeding groups and things, I had a small section of hybrids. And I'm talking now, this is 2019. So, a few years ago now. And generally speaking, they weren't really much of a thing in this country at all. Um, as, time and space grew, I met various breeders along the way. And I met now a very good friend of mine called Lucas Gozczek, originally from Poland, who came over to the UK. He had a very extensive, excuse me, very extensive collection of hybrids. And over the years, we started talking. I started picking up a few things from him, and after a couple of years, he's a very very smart fella, veterinary surgeon. He's been studying a lot to do heavily for his doctorate. He then came to me and went, "So I need to thin down my collection. I'm studying." He also breeds and shows Afghan hounds along with his wife Margaret. And they went, "So here you go." And he donated to me about 30 odd animals, all of very, very ridiculous, like combos that you never even heard of in this country. So I kind of went with, well, if I'm going to have a badge, I might as well wear it. And that's when I just went, right, let's go for it and see where I can take this.
When you say if I'm gonna have a badge, are you saying like the negative connotations that some people might have about it?
At that time, there was more of a negative view about it. So, but it's something that I've always felt passionate about anyway. I'd start building up my own hybrid collection myself. And if it's a case, if I'm going to be known as the hybrid guy, let's go for it. Let's see where I can take this and see where this fascination of mine can actually lead.
Yeah, I like that. I like the fact that you're like, do you know what? I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do,
Well,
and you just
that's it.
stand by it. Yeah.
I forever have kept and bred what I like. I don't do it for other people's enjoyment. I'm not trying to follow a trend. I'm doing this because I enjoy it. That is as simple as.
Especially with like land pelteds, I feel like in the UK they've like fallen off massively, excluding Mexican blacks. Let's put them aside. Like,
Yeah, the Mexican black trend is an interesting one.
yeah, I mean that was my first snakes, Mexican blacks, but I got into it. Like I found out what Mexican blacks were because I was like Googling what different colors of things they were. And I found out it was like this jet black snake, and I was like, right, I want that because that's cool. And then after I was like enamored and like pining for these Mexican blacks, I started to see like this thing start to come up. So it sounds so hipster of me, but I was into them before the whole thing started. But
I remember I had Mexican black back when they were the £40, almost like throwaway snakes at the time, where no one had any value to them. And Christ, I think I sold that again about 50 quid when I was 15. they weren't they weren't worth a lot back then.
it's one of them weird things because like you're like, right, I want to work with something that's worth a little bit of something so that if I produce it, the animals aren't kind of throwaway, right? And I'm not stuck with them. Um, but at the same time, like people don't value them.
Yeah. Like the term throwaway, I know I hate that term, but it's sort of generally what people associate with it. Yeah, the cheap animals that people don't see much of a need to be working with.
Mhm.
But that's kind of where I fall into it. I like that stuff that people don't see a point of working with it.
That is a bit of me. That all
Yeah.
I talk about is king snakes, isn't it? Really? Not so much milk snakes, to be fair. I've only just started being like, oh, milk snakes. I've been very much like Getula brain.
Yeah.
Because I started off with my Mexican blacks and then got Cali, and then I think with the Calis, I feel like they're going through that phase and that cycle where everyone's like produced like meh like level Calis, and they've just flooded the market, and then no one really cares about them right now. Like I bought some Calis recently because I like Calis. Um,
Yeah, I have a very yo-yo relationship with Callies. I end up getting them. I end up getting annoyed with them being biting me all the time. I end up getting rid of them, and then I always end up getting more. So I've just accepted it, and I now have a pair.
See, this is what I mean, right? The reason that I got a load of Calis is because like ours are really bitey, but Americans like say Calis are like really lovely, like how we perceive corns. So like there's something going on there between our population and the US population. So I was like, I
Definitely,
wonder if I can breed for non-bitiness and then produce like lines of Calis that are like sweethearts.
you can.
So
There is every reason that you can breed for disposition. I mean, Christ, look
yeah,
at something like, take for instance, a ball python. You pluck a ball python out of the wild, it's going to be a wild snake. It's going to bite. It's going to try and defend itself. And now you have these little derpy balls that just sit there and sort of tongue flick at you.
100%. I mean, like behavior and like disposition of different behavioral traits is entirely hereditary. We know that from like papers on like garter snakes, where it's like the bold individuals in the population will be expanding the range, and then the shy ones will be like holding fort. So you know that like different like behavioral sets or like can be like changed. And like, you'd have those bold ones that were like a founder population on an island or something, and then you've got like a really bold population. So we know it happens. We've like seen it over and over and over again. So breeding for behavior is like a thing that I think the hobby doesn't really do because they don't think about it, but I really want to play with it. So that's why I got I got like four more Calis. Um, but when I was buying them, the shop owner was like, "You're the only person that cares about Calis," and I was like, "Great."
Yeah,
But
there's
I think they're going for a lull, and then like the Mexican blacks, in like 20 years time, 10 years time, whatever, you could see a resurgence of Calis, and then when you've been working with them, producing absolute sweethearts, you're sat there like, "Way."
which more that there's so we had that influx from Europe, when obviously sadly the EU ban happened on that complex. But the stuff that they're breeding in the States at the minute is really quite incredible. There's some gorgeous animals, and there's so many morphs out there actually that people don't seem to know about. You just think of, Desert Phase, Newport, albinos, basic stuff. But
Scissors
there's
crossing,
a
things like that.
lot
Yeah.
more out there that you think. Depends on Cali's anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I like things like mosaics and the 50/50s. I'm very much, I like black and white.
Yeah, contrast is
That's
really
to
good.
me, that's a Cali to me.
Yeah.
So I want to produce like real nice outbred black and white different lines and produce from like, to produce absolute sweethearts so I can make like amazing pets. And like in my head I'm like Ellie. Ellie used to when she was younger, didn't you like really want a Cali? And
Yeah.
then you found out they were biting. You're like, nah.
Yeah. And I met them when I was at uni, and the ones at Spa Shop weren't very, I don't want to say they weren't very nice because that's not the way to describe it, but they had like a massive food response, so you couldn't hold them without them latching on and things like that. And so it was just like a put off, like I'm just not dealing with that.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like you would have loved to have an absolute sweetheart that was like Beetlejuice, like color, like patterning and things like that. So like that's what I want to do. Um, so I'm very much in the sense of you. Like I just want to do Callies because I like Callies, but they're not worth like anything. So it's gonna be a struggle to like do anything with them and make sure they go to like places that are gonna value them and not just like thrown around. But you got
But
to
that's
start
it. It's
somewhere to
how
fix it.
it's not about what the general public values them. It's about what do you value to them. I've put silly amounts of money into stuff that probably isn't really worth anything, but it is to me because I enjoy it and I've had get my passion out of it.
Do you ever worry about where the babies go? Like that would be my only thing of when you're producing animals that are like 40 quid at a time. I just worry that people don't care.
I think that's a worry with anyone that produces anything, whether it's a £40 animal or £1,000 animal. You want to make sure that that is treated and as good as it can. And I care for my low end stuff exactly the same as my high end stuff. It's still an animal at the end of the day, just deserves that care. It doesn't matter what the monetary value of it is. It's still a life that needs care. So if that is, you can't control what happens when you sell that animal. You can sell it with the greatest intention in the world and be under the illusion that the keeper's going to give it the best life it can. Doesn't mean they will. Also, it doesn't mean that they won't mistreat a high end animal. Sadly, you have no control over that, but you can only do your part to the best of your ability. That is all you can do.
Yeah, I mean, like, I thought I would be like really torn up about like producing animals, and then like those clutches of MBKs that I produced and like just gave to shops and stuff. As I gave, it was like 50 quid a snake, but um, I've not thought about them since. So like, because I trust that the shop's done their job to find the right homes for them. I mean, I have sh sold to one person with a kid who got it for Christmas, and I get updates via Instagram or how this snake's doing, and that's lovely. But like, I think like as long as you know that you've put in the steps to give that snake the best start it can, at a certain point it's out of your hands and like you've done your job almost.
Exactly. If you try and hold yourself accountable for every stage of it, then you wouldn't breed anything. That you can do everything you can with your greatest of intentions, and then what happens to that animal after you is out of your control. You've just got
Mm.
to trust that the keeper that you're selling it to is going to give it the best life it can. That's all any keeper can really do, though.
Do you find there's a lot of like demand for hybrids, or do you find you have to convince people that hybrids are cool, or do you
Oh
think there's just people who want them?
no, there's a demand for them. I actually don't struggle to find homes for my hybrids as much as even my milk snakes. That bizarrely enough, there's this general public connotation of people hate hybrids. They really don't. They like them because they're unusual and they're different. And there isn't so many people out there working with them seriously. So when people do find out these people actually, like myself, who are working with them properly, it's a case of, oh, okay, that's sort of brings up the conversation. And, in the end, I have, in the last 3 years of breeding, I've never I've never not sold my babies from each season. I have one offspring left from 2024. That is it.
Nice, because like obviously like depends what circles you sit in, I suppose. Because like I've only ever heard that like oh hybrid's disgusting, da, 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 it's gonna ruin the hobby, blah 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 blah. And then obviously lately I have my own opinions, and I'm like I don't really think that, but it makes you think that like everyone thinks that, and clearly that's not true because you're like shifting them quite easily.
Yeah, I mean, I'll still breed and keep what I want, and if these babies don't sell, then okay, I'll still keep them, still 'cause it's still got to be cared for. And then someone out there will want a home for that animal eventually. But no, there is certainly a demand for them. But it's a case of I've taken something that I thought was cool and I have thrown it in people's faces. I've put it on every social media thing going. I've played the social media game and shown people why these animals are to be appreciated. Because no matter how extensive you look at it, whether you're a rat keeper, whether you are bioactive, whatever, fundamentally it's snakes in a box. Let's be honest. That we keep them because we like the enjoyment of looking at them, whether it's in the biome or whether the animal, but we like them because they're pretty. So just appreciate them for what they are, not what you believe and perceive that this hobby should be. Just think outside the box a little bit. That's all it is.
I will say your social media gets me every time. Like I'm scrolling through and I'm like, oh my God, look at that. And then I'm like, oh, milksnake mutations, of course it is. Every
Yeah,
single time.
these days I've kind of got a pretty good breeding group that most stuff is just jaw dropping. And it's bizarre though. I say this to my partner quite often that I get so used to working with such jaw dropping animals these days. I'll look at a normal Callie and go, oh, look at that, because it's different to what I do. Because I'm so used to these crazy looking animals, ridiculous patterns that sometimes for me, like the wild type stuff is really cool because I go both ways. I either like the most crazy batshit things going or really, really niche wild type stuff. It's one or the other.
So when you're doing your pairings, do you have like a dream snake in mind? Like one day I want to produce this, or are you more like, what if I put this in? What if I put that in, and just seeing what kind of appears?
I never do just pray and hope. There's always an intention.
Mhm.
My general intention with hybrids is to create a look that is not achievable in pure species. So I'm not just going to kind of bang this with this and see what happens, because that's how you end up with muddy looking, essentially, the way that hybrids were always perceived muddy looking trash snakes that will ruin the hobby. It's not what I'm here to do. I want to create something that is a unique look. You can either, if you're trying to create, say, a striped looking milk snake, or, say a purple one, which we don't have. You can pick and choose genes from various species and various means to get there if you choose.
It's interesting that you said that, like you're trying to produce something that doesn't fit what you can find in nature, so it's not these muddy animals that people are gonna say is ruining the hobby. Like obviously from my perspective, what they say is like it's gonna be ambiguous and then it's gonna get into the bloodlines of clean stuff and then it's gonna ruin the hobby. Where my opinion is it doesn't matter because a defense we use for the hobby is that it's conservation and it's is this and that, and it's not. It's absolute bollocks. Like
Yeah.
there's no conservation value to what people are
there,
doing.
there are very, very few people out there that are doing true conservation work. Like, even if I own a couple of quite unusual species that I'm not going to hybridize them. I'm keeping them because I want to breed that species.
Mhm.
But the stuff that I'm hybridizing and working with, not being funny, it's everywhere. It's corn snakes, it's kings, it's milks. It's the stuff that's all over. And even then, I'm not even picking from the unusual species. It's mostly Cali King, Pueblan, corn,
Yeah.
Honduran, and various things like that. It's commonly available species that are everywhere.
I don't particularly think it matters anyway, because like it's not conservation, it's nothing like real, if that makes sense. So the only really thing is we're playing with pets. It's pets. We're not like zoos, we're not conservation, like it's pets. So the only thing that's really happening is that you might tread on someone's toes that wants to run their hobby a different way because they want to collect and they want one of this and I want to be clean because like say it's this and this and this. But it's just how you want to play with your hobby, right?
But
But
those
that's all it is.
that's where I come back to the whole thing of fundamentally it's snakes in a box. That if that person wants to run their hobby like that, fantastic. But they will go to the lengths of tracking back lineages and going, right, who did you get this from? Who did they get the parents from? And they will backtrack. Whereas I'm not trying to deceive anybody. The animals that I breed are hybrids. I will forever tell people are hybrids. The animals that are purebred, they are always purebred. And what then happens to those animals, like I say, is sadly it is out of my control. If people want to be, pull a dick move and deceive someone, I can't tell them not to. But hybrid snakes are a subsector of herpetoculture in general that isn't going anywhere. People are always going to do it. They always have. They've been breeding these animals. I mean, the first jungle corns, off memory, were bred in something like the 70s, 80s. They've been around for a very long time. They're not going anywhere.
Well, I mean, like, none of our animals are actually representative of the wild anyway. So everyone's like, we want these wild type animals. It's like the Callies that we get, or the Desert Kings, or the MBKs.
Yeah.
We've actually taken them and selectively bred for like better feeders for like starting on the road and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So what we have has already drifted artificially from what is in the wild. So saying what you have is like representative of what because you want it to be this wild pure thing. It's not even true. So if my MBKs, they are not a speck of white on them. They are everything you would say an MBK would be. If they're actually 48% Cali, does that change anything for me? No, because it's just saying what we want to classify that in the hobby, but it's different from the wild anyway. So what's the difference? If as long as it fits to what you want it to look like, so you can have that type of snake, that type of snake, and that type of snake, to me, it doesn't actually matter. Other than this weird like obsession with purity and like collecting, I don't think it matters.
Exactly. I'll retract his name so that he doesn't get roasted. But a friend of mine, he used to be very, very high up in London Zoo in their reptile section. Even I remember having a conversation with him at one point saying that say that if you picked two locality animals straight out of the wild and then you bred them, all of a sudden you're not breeding locality anymore because you've selectively picked that locality animal and had a man-made intervention. It's no longer a wild type animal because you've completely taken out the choice of what individual that animal breeds with. So one that I can remember, Harris County Speckled Kings. Fantastic. Those original animals, yeah, they probably have derived from Harris County in the States. But you've picked two animals and then artificially put them in an environment where they're bred. That's suddenly not a wild type animal anymore.
Well, there's selective pressures that makes that locality what that locality is, as in like what survives in that locality no longer is relevant because you've had a founder effect of what you've taken out, and it's whatever that subset of genetics is going to be, whatever the locality in the hobby is. So the locality, what you've got in the hobby versus what in the wild, are entirely already drifting apart. So what you've actually just got is like a morph.
Fundamentally,
locality is a morph with a different name.
That's all it is. It's a form of line breeding.
Yeah, you are line breeding, and like to me, like it's all the same. And like I used to be, because obviously we trained to like be zookeepers and stuff, and went to university and stuff. So I came to the hobby with this like purity mindset, and like it could be for conservation. I had all these ideas about what I thought the hobby could be. But over time, I've just realised that no one manages stud books. No one's doing this and that. It's just kind of like a load of random snakes put together. No one, not very few people are tracking lineage. Like it's just snakes being put together and reproducing for the most part. Generally, and I know people are like that hardcore doing things differently, but like, so I came to the realization that it's just pets, and I've kind of like had these chips on my shoulders that I've just kind of let go. But would you say that's true, Ellie?
Yeah, I think so. I think for a long time for me, I came to the realization like what is even a species, because you can't even define it. It's a very human-made concept because we originally are like told that a species is something that when you pair them together, they create offspring that's viable. But obviously that's not true because you've got California king snakes and milk snakes making babies that make babies. It's very much like a human trying to put something in a box. And I've always had the mindset of as long as you're producing healthy animals, what does it even matter? And especially when we're talking about we've taken animals from the wild, we can't get new genetics or we don't bother to get new genetics. Cali Kings in the UK are actually quite inbred. So you putting new genes into that bloodline is actually only a positive thing for the individuals themselves. So I don't really get this like purist mindset of it ruining anything, but that's just me.
Because, yeah, hilariously enough, so say if you wanted, you can pick which science you want. You can pick hobby science or you can pick taxonomic science. Because now, by taxonomic science, Pueblan milks, Sinaloan, and Nelsons are all classified as the same species. Okay, cool. No, Nelsons and Sinaloan, I can get that. Pueblan, that they visually, you'd say they look different. According to taxonomic science, they're all the same. So, are you in the wrong to be breeding, say, a Nelsons to a Pueblan? Depends which science that you're following.
Because at that point, people recognise that we're doing it for boxes that we want in a hobby, right?
Exactly.
Like the Jalisco milksnake. Is that how you say it? Jalisco? It is Jalisco, isn't it?
Jalisco.
Yeah.
Not too sure, actually, on that one.
That doesn't exist anymore, does it? Taxonomically speaking.
Taxonomically, no.
But we're just doing it because we want to have that box, right?
Yeah, basically.
So what's the difference between having different boxes of different things that don't exist in nature as well?
Even things like the Stewart's milks, they're now classified under the abnormal the abnormal bracket. So they're technically speaking the same as Honduran milksnake's. But cross Honduran milksnake's, as much as we say they're Honduran in the hobby, they're a mess. Hondurans, as we know it, they don't really exist.
Well, like, isn't like technically like what's the thing on Nelson's and the albinism that got put in something else, Ellie? You know it better than me.
Is it true? Because I heard that all milksnakes with albinism started with the Nelsons, so all of them technically are hybrids.
Not quite. There is theory floating around that the albino Pueblan originally derived from Nelsons. That there is forever going to be an argument on that one, and let's be honest, no one's going to truly owe up to whether they are truly pure or not, because scientifically now it doesn't matter. The albinism from in what we see as Honduran milks, I believe, came from Central Atlantic American milk snakes originally. But you know, who's going to say who's heard of a Central Atlantic American milk? No one. But you've heard of a Honduran. Again, scientifically, they are now the same. But talking back in 90s when these things started first coming out, there was some dodgy stuff that went on. There it was. And I think that's where the negative connotations around hybrids and crossbreeding came from. But it's now the work that I'm trying to undo. Because it's how some of these morphs in our hobby fundamentally came around.
Unless you view that nothing matters.
Unless you view that nothing matters.
I'm like, what's the difference between us saying, right, we want to have all these different types of snakes in our hobby, right? So we can have different subsets that we keep together that breed together. It's almost like breeds at this point, right?
Yeah.
So what's the difference between we want to keep producing the Jaliscos because we want to keep the Jaliscos so we don't like breed them into everything else and lose them?
Yeah.
What's the difference between saying we want to have Jaliscos that don't exist and Imperials that don't exist either?
I get where you're coming from. I suppose the argument against that is that Imperials would never exist in the first place, whereas at one point in time, Jaliscos did. I do think it is important to keep these forgotten subspecies alive, because that's the point where it starts to become about conservation work. And there are people in this country that do have Jalisco milks, and I think that is a fantastic thing for people to be breeding, because you don't want to be losing certain things just because to science they say that it doesn't matter anymore, but at one point it did. So
and it can again, because things change.
Yeah, but it's still important for it to matter.
Just a quick one. If you're not part of our Patreon, I would recommend joining. It's not just a case of join Patreon and we give you a crisp high five and a couple of stickers. We're putting real work into our Patreon. We're doing monthly meets, whether that's a journal club where we sit down on a Zoom call and read journal articles together, and I help build the skill sets and how to actually assess science for you guys. And we work together on building up those skill sets. We have a monthly keeper chats. We pick a topic and talk about it in depth. I'm also building courses. For as little as £4 a month, you're getting access to the course lessons that we're making. And normally kind of shy away from like trying to promote myself money-wise too much, but I'm going to say it how it is. This information that we're putting into this course would put you in the top 1% of people's understanding of animal welfare science in herpetoculture. I would put money down that that is true. There are other courses out there that don't even go anywhere near into much detail, and they're hundreds of pounds. So for this to be £4, it's a ridiculous, ridiculous bargain. So head on over to Patreon/Reptiles and Research and take part in everything we got going on over there. Back to the episode.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason why both can't exist at the same time.
Exactly.
Because I don't think that my MBKs are hybrids. Like, I have no reason to suspect they are hybrids. To me, they just look like MBKs. Not a speck of anything on them at all, even when they come out as like hatchlings, they're just black. So what you're doing has not influenced how I've, up till now, ran my hobby at all. I've still got the MBKs that I've got. Like,
Yeah.
so things generally can and will stay separate if you want them to. And even then, like, let's say there's like 14% Cali in my MBK. Do I really care?
That comes down to personal morals and ethics at that point. But there's some very interesting things about where certain genes come from and also how they can cross over in different species. That something like an MBK, fantastic. You're not going to have any issues because the couple of morphs that are out there, they're MBK. I say that the T negative albino MBKs. That seems a
Cali sus.
That seems very Cali sus. But if you're starting to get into different strains of albinism that do actually cross over from multiple species, you ain't going to have a damn clue where it came from originally because genetically it all works.
Do you think what do you think we can do, like as a hobby in general, to make people feel more comfortable with the idea that things are going to stay separate? Because, like, obviously we look at Imperials, and I really like Imperials.
Yeah,
they're always listed as like Imperial Pueblans,
yeah,
or something like that. But I understand the argument that it's going to be like, well, they think it's just the same as like Morph Pueblans, and then people that don't know any better are going to like mess things up. Do you think like there's like a naming convention where you could have like Imperial Lampropeltid or like something like that separates them entirely? You know what I mean?
Well, I can understand that. When it comes to something like Imperials, I mean, personal friend of mine, he fell into that trap. He did buy some Imperials thinking that they were a morph, and he is a fella who isn't a particular fan of hybrids. I'm talking to you, Paul.
Oh dear.
But he appreciates them for what they are. But no, I agree with you there that when it comes to naming of certain things, there should be a way of defining it and sort of making it very apparent that it is a hybrid. Sadly, something like Imperials, the name is stuck. It's one of those that you try to change it now, people won't have a clue what you're on about. But when it comes to the more sort of newer combos, generally people they name it to combine the species that are involved so that it's very apparent that it's a hybrid.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like I want to go into the spiel now, Ellie, because I'm holding it back. I've been wanting to say it the entire time. So we have like long drives, right? We talk about things, and we start talking about like domestication, right? And we start googling, and every single species has been domesticated. Never came from just one species, right? So our cattle came from like 2 or 3 different species of bovine, right? Dogs weren't necessarily just from one wolf. Sheep came from like several. Pigs came from several different like pig species. So when you start looking into it, everything hybridization is just a part of domestication, right?
And it has been for thousands of years.
Yes. So one of the hobby's defenses for like against antis and stuff is like, well, what we're doing is domestication, and it's not like for the wild. It's like we're domesticating these animals, so therefore you can't take them away from them. But technically speaking, if you think about it, the hybrids and stuff and producing these new animals that don't look like or act like anything else that exists in nature, that is starting down the road of domestication of these snakes. So we use domestication as a defense for the hobby, but then when someone's actually starting to go down that road, people get upset. Do you not find that funny?
There's there's some very funny people because the reptile hobby can be very fickle. That you can, argue about domestication and it will trigger certain people in a certain scenario. But then you apply the same logic to a different scenario and they'll agree with you. It's just a very unusual.
It's emotions and also
Yeah,
money tied up in things as well. Because if they're making money producing something that they're selling as pure or something or other or blah blah, like everyone thinks about how things were going to impact them at first thing. You know what I mean?
that sadly is where some of the negative connotations around hybrids came from because people were, they were pulling morphs out of different animals to for money and then selling it as pure. That is just totally wrong. You don't go doing that.
I really like the idea of the Imperials. Like, because at a certain point, when you're producing things like Imperials and stuff, you're starting to produce like breeds.
Yeah,
Because like that has been in every single sort of like culture, as in like herpetoculture, aviculture, aquaculture. These breeds of like birds have popped up, like with the big puffy heads, and that aren't natural, and they're definitely breeds, like dog breeds, cattle breeds, all these different things. Like it's starting to be that way, and like you think about making things as like domestication and better pets. Example that I would say is the Eastern indigos in the UK. They're incredibly inbred and they have like the exploding hearts and stuff, don't they?
yeah.
So I'm like, well, why don't you take the Texas indigos to them because you can import them legally, as far as I'm aware. Take them to them, like diversify the gene pool so there's more heterozygous population. Like sort out your health problems, and if you want to come back in and bring in that red chin and produce hobby form Eastern indigos, that's better than carrying on like, oh, it has to be pure, inbreed, and just run it into the ground, right? That's my opinion, anyway.
No, I completely agree with you that at that point you're on almost like a path to destruction.
Yeah.
That you keep inbreeding these animals, eventually it's going to catch up with you. That as long as you're honest about how you've managed to strengthen things, surely having a healthy, stronger animal is more important than it being pure. Because
Because
at that
mm,
point, you're trying to do it for your own ethical reason. That, but you're actually at that point negating animal health, and that is something you shouldn't ever do. If you're not going to breed animals that you know have problems, stop doing it.
Well, I don't understand why the reptile hobby can't learn from dogs because my dog, for example, Indy here, she's not a purebred cocker spaniel. I have no idea if she is. She looks like one, but she's a rescue, so who knows what's in it. That doesn't mean that my other dog, Merle, she is a purebred cocker spaniel because I have her lineage back to the Victorian times. The two don't impact on each other. Like they are two separate individuals. And if everyone who wanted a purebred cocker spaniel, they can still get one because you go to someone who's an ethical breeder who has your lineage. But also, there's some dog breeds, such as Dalmatians, where they were so badly inbred and had health problems that they've had to include pointers into the genes. But it's done in a way that if you entirely disagreed with that, you know exactly when that happened and who that's bred to. So you could find access to a Dalmatian that doesn't have that. So those kind of things are already happening in hobbies and it's never stopped anything anyway. So I don't understand why people in the reptile hobby are so upset.
do you think it's because we collect more? It's more of a collecting mindset than like pure pets. Like I have to keep reminding myself it's about pets. It's about pets. It's about pets. At its purest form, what we're doing is keeping pets. Because you can go into like that collecting mindset and I want this. You have this like Noah's Ark collection almost, and you have to like remind yourself almost sometimes. And I think like our culture and herpetoculture is different from like other things because it's about collecting sometimes, and that is a big part of like the subculture of herpetoculture is like people do like to collect, and I wonder if that's at odds with like, well, if it's not pure, then I can't put that sticker in my sticker book, you know?
Quite possibly, because you're not going to see people that are into dogs. They're not going to go and have a Dalmatian, a Cock Spaniel, a Labrador, a this, a that, da 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 da. They generally have their thing that they do. I mean, I suppose you could say that about myself, that as much as I'm a collector per se, I've channeled that into a few different types of animal, and that's generally where I sort of stay in my lane as such.
Mm.
So I've kind of got a sector of both here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like really, really interesting. Like the Imperials and stuff. You're producing some stuff that I'm like, the ones that look like cows, they're so, I mean, like I said earlier, they're black and white for me. I'm like, that is like so a bit of me.
Yeah,
But if
I
you
hatched
produce
one.
cows and you're just producing nothing but cows, at a certain point you're producing a breed. So as you do that and then you breed them behaviorally and then you breed in preferences for different things, you're literally producing like these different pets of like look just how like different like dogs will have like different like working behaviors and stuff or different purposes or dispositions. You're getting to that point, which I find that really interesting.
Imperials are an interesting phenomenon that no one can really understand. That fundamentally there is albinism and occasionally hypo that is floating around in Imperials. Other than that, it's just simply that this combination has the key to produce so many different visual phenotypes that you can put two animals together that look visually very similar and get absolutely ridiculous results. I often describe hybridizing as non-linear breeding. You don't put X with Y and get Z. You end up putting X with Y and you get freaking Q. It just doesn't make sense. And that's kind of one of the beauties of it, that the outcomes are so unpredictable. And you're not even dealing with any mutations. It's simply a fact of how the genetics of the different species mix that creates
Is
this.
it different percentages and each different hatchling will have a different percentage sort of thing?
Yeah, because okay, on paper, I backtrack everything and I tell everything that an imperial pueblan is 75% pueblan, 25% Calais. But as soon as you start getting to F2, that goes out the window because those babies don't know that they're 75% pueblan milk and go, okay, I need to express 75% pueblan milk blood. They will express however much percentage blood they choose. But on paper, they are one thing, but phenotypically, they're going to go and do whatever they're going to go and do.
Exactly. Yeah. Like here's an interesting thing for you. So this does make this is relevant, I promise. So me and my family did like a my history DNA thing, right?
Okay.
So both my parents were like 40% to 30% like English DNA, right?
Yeah.
Mine comes back 0% English DNA. And I'm like, wait, am I adopted or something? Like, but then like I got like a 50% like relatedness to both my parents. I'm like, okay, so no. But for some reason, English DNA completely skipped me, even though my parents are both like got English DNA. So that's just how like inheritance works. It could be wacky like that. So technically, I'm not English at all in my DNA, which is wild.
No, that actually links in very, very well because there's certain species and certain combos where you start to mix things differently, and certain bloodlines seem very weak compared to others. Whereas, some show through incredibly strong, even at quite diluted percentages.
Mm. Just one's more prevalent than the other, isn't it? I guess.
Yeah, I can't tell you scientifically why that occurs, but there are certain species that you combine them, and one species will just completely blow out the other influence for some reason that goes way over my head.
Does that bother you, that lack of control about what you produce, or is it just exciting?
That's exciting to me. That's the whole point of it. That
Because I'm very much like I want to produce like cows, I want to produce like this, and I want to lock genes in and prove type. So I'm like, right, I've got my breeds I'm trying to do. Like I would be like, right, I'm trying to go down this route of domestication. I want to produce like snake breeds in my head, right? So for me, not being able to control it would stress me out.
I guess I've got quite a substantial group of milk snakes where I have predictable outcomes, and I do have focused projects. And I want to create extreme hypos. I want to create verifiable hybenos, things like that. So I suppose that kind of tickles that bit of thing in my head. Whereas the other side of it, I have hybrids where the outcomes are so wildly unpredictable that makes it exciting as well.
Assuming you have to like take like things back to parents and stuff to try and like lock in genes and stuff. Do you ever like calculate like the inbreeding coefficient number, or is that just like real hardcore?
That's pretty hardcore at that point. But there are certain genes that cross between species in F1 that you don't have to go and do back crossing to lock in certain things. So take for instance like hypo from corns and hypo from Honduran. It's proven to sit on F1, they produce hypos. Same as anery in corn and anery in Honduran produces it. Anery's in F1. But strangely enough, amel in corn and albino in Honduran doesn't. You breed those together and you get double hets for both strains. It's just interesting how two morphs sit on the same alias, but the third doesn't.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. But there's just so much to it where like it actually excites me because my brain goes, right, okay, let's start producing like snake breeds. Because also I worry about Getula because obviously they've got banned in Europe
Yeah,
and there's no reason why the UK can't be like, okay, well, like we just ban Getula. So if you've got like ambiguous, like domesticated or like breeds, you can be like, well, it's not Getula. It's actually more this. But then you've still got what you liked from Getula in there.
yeah, there could be an element of people that could do that. And things like, say, like jungle corns, everybody knows that that is 50-50. That many generations down the line, it's still fundamentally, it's 50-50. Cali King and corn. So it's at that point you go, it's a bit of a dick move if you start saying, oh, suddenly it's not. But I get why it could occur because if you're suddenly banning a species, that's really detrimental to someone that has that species in their collection. That suddenly you can't do anything with it,
Mm.
which you can't hide what Kelly King is. But it's not something I do because I pride myself on being completely upfront about everything I make. But if you're gonna do that, then you're gonna go and do it. You can't stop people.
I don't mean like necessarily be like nefarious, but like when you're down the line of like, well, actually it's like 25% this, 25% this, 14% this and this, you just produce like a hobby form snake at that point.
Yeah,
Like you're in a position to be like, well, it's actually not what you're trying to ban anymore. Like we're far from it. So it's more a case of like this is our own thing now, like as a bit of a defense thing.
yeah. I mean, I am trying to bring Getulabud down in my hybrids, mostly because I find that it's very visually dominant, and it's not a look that I'm going for. But I have my own personal reasons for doing that. Yeah, there's nothing to do with the ban that occurred. Excuse me. It's simply the how I'm trying to bring my collection. I have a couple of jungle corns, which I breed them because I picked up a very interesting project where I've now got blue eye blonde jungle corns, and that is showing some very interesting things about how that gene interacts and what it does. And I'm only in very infancy with understanding what I can do with it, but I've certainly got some interesting plans. That's for sure.
I'm really interested in behaviorally what these animals end up acting like. I mean, I'm like in racks, they're kind of just like the way that you keep like a Cali and a milksnake in a corn, like it's generally just like aspens. Do you know what I mean? Like, but
Yeah,
like if you give them like a big enclosure, like what does like a hybrid that you don't even it's like far from all of it at this point. What does it do? You know? That
it does
interests me.
whatever a snake does. It
Yeah.
at that point you can say, oh, it does a little bit of this, it does a little bit of that. The generally North and South American colubrids, they have sort of fairly similar behavior patterns. Some of them are more bold than others, but equally, you could get an incredibly shy Cali and incredibly aggressive corn. You know, it's I'm not dealing with anything that's too ridiculously out there.
I mean, a lot of this would like you do get hybrids occur in the wild anyway, or you get like
But
intergrade zones and things like that. I mean, that goes back to what Ellie said about like what is a species because like they kind of all the Getchler kind of like just blend. It's like a gradient of Getchler, isn't it? So it's not like it's like bam, bam, and bam. And the species concept is just what we're trying to in our human minds trying to define things as and put them in boxes to understand them. But actually, to nature, it's just like you know.
yeah, like well, to even say that, just to prove a point there, people say like you couldn't breed old and new wild rat snakes. There's I can't say I know the person personally, but there's a fellow out in Asia who successfully hatched corn cross Thai beauty. So that's something that's pretty incredible. Again, someone they managed to successfully breed a Russian rat snake to a king rat, so the Coronata.
That's cool.
I've seen photos of those babies. It's and that looks pretty legit. Some of the things that people are doing, say like crossing ball pythons with green tree pythons, as much as that one is for me, it's a bit of it raises a few eyebrows. It just shows what is actually possible, what we define as a species as such.
Yeah, it definitely does because they're not even in the same genus, and like, yeah, it's a bit mad. But like, with the hybrids, I'm more thinking of it as like like you're producing these like breeds of snakes, right? And I think it
Yeah.
needs to make sense for like the welfare of the animal. Of like the two things can't be at odds with each other. So you produce something that's like it wants extreme arid conditions, and something wants to be in an absolute sweatbox. And then what'd you do? You know, unless you just give it like load of humid hides and like options, but like. When something is like so different from each other, then I'm like, oh, well, I'm not sure I like that. But when things are like a Desert King and an MBK or a Desert King and a Kali, I'm like, well, they do that anyway. It wasn't.
See, for me, I generally avoid integrating. So I personally wouldn't pair something like a Desert King and a Cali because at that point they're gonna look like one or the other, and
Yeah.
it's where you're trying to avoid. That's why I want my hybrids to look like hybrids. You want to look at that and go instantly, no, that is different. That's not
Right.
an
Okay. Yeah.
lie. Like,
Yeah, I meant it from like a welfare perspective. It's not going to matter to them snakes whatsoever. But from the hobby perspective and like not treading on other people's toes that want to run their hobby a different way, that makes total sense.
oh no, these hybrids, they don't know they're hybrids. They don't care.
Exactly.
That snake just knows it's a snake. If we're talking in very, very basic layman's terms, that snake's not going to know that it's a cross of 3 or 4 different species. As long as its care needs are met and that snake is healthy, they don't care.
Have you been doing it long enough that you notice like different longevity and different like combinations of hybrids?
I've been doing it long enough to now know kind of what visually from a production perspective what works and what doesn't. But I deal with all of my stuff is North and South American colubrids, which realistically they'll have about the same rough lifespan in in the hobby. They're all around the sort of 12 to 20 year mark. So I'm not doing anything that's ridiculous, and the care needs for all these animals, they're all fairly similar. And in hobby terms, I'm dealing with hard wearing stuff. So all I'm trying to do at this point is create a different look. I'm not trying to experiment with crazy looking stuff like that. There's guys out there that do that, and props to them because they're doing some very, very interesting work. But I haven't got time for that. I've got a partner with 2 children and I work a full-time job. I don't want to be trying to dial in the humidity of a green tree python cross wall python to make sure that animals' care needs are met. I want to make sure that animals are out the box, they're not going to cause you problems, and they are just there to be appreciated for what they are.
I'd imagine like Imperials are like hardy as shit because it's like a Cali and then like what it's the Pueblos, isn't it? The Imperials.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they're like conditions that they can take. You've always like expanded what like so if anything, making them like hard to care for, you made them like almost like a bit more sturdy in a way.
Well, because like you say, with the whole inbreeding thing, when you crossbreeding species, you're getting a very, very strong, healthy animal because it's completely unrelated. And that's why even then, there's stuff like Imperials, which is, a more prevalent type of hybrid, that I've gone to the effort of sourcing animals that are from traceable F1 breeding. So I have a Puebla Cal. So that is the foundation of a 50-50 Pueblan cross Cali that was bred again by my friend Lucas Goschek, which he did the F1 breeding himself from a chocolate striped Cali to an apricot Pueblan. So I know that animal is completely outcrossed from any imperial stock that we have in this country. And then I can start to work it back in and just make sure that things are as strong as possible.
Can you notice the difference between what you would consider strong and what you would consider weak?
I suppose in terms of growth rates, feeding response, general health issues, that these animals that eat, you want an animal that is stress free. That if you're starting to inbreed stuff, you'll find that the babies hatch out weak. You'll have problems with fertility. They're not putting weight on very well, and that's kind of a sign that all right, there's something wrong going here that you don't want to be working with.
Yeah, because like I always imagine like I suppose it's different in racks because you can't really see, but I always imagine like if you put it in an enclosure with a load of branches and stuff, if you produce something that like really mentally wants to climb, but then like it just like struggles and like flops and falls or something, then that would be the thing. But like, okay, so that's a weak combination and all that. I think it's just all unexplored and like it like intrigues me or like what's going on, you know?
Yeah, there's certain things that, from an ethical point of view, that I wouldn't work with, because I cannot remember for the life of me which way around it is, but carpondros, so the carpet cross green tree pythons, it's either the males or females that have fertility issues. So at that point, that is a known thing that occurs. I tap out at that point. I'm not going to work with stuff that has known issues. That's just one of those sadly known combos that doesn't work very well.
I think the line is drawn by people at different areas as well. Like, I mean, I've got friends that like would would look at me in disgust for even having this conversation, and then I'm happy to have this conversation. Obviously, you're really into it. Like the line of where people draw things and how it affects like their emotions in relation to what they think the hobby should be, it'll be different, I suppose. But yeah, I think most people would be like, "Oh, Capondro, like fertility issues." Like, no,
Yeah, same with the whole like spider ball python debate.
yeah.
That don't work with stuff that's got problems. Just because it's still an animal that deserves a quality of life. If you're not going to give it that, or it's going to have known issues, just don't do it.
Mm. Going back to like what you were saying, people were like crossing things. How do you even do that? So if I were to put like, I want to pair like a Cali and like a corn snake, I, would they just like because they're in that mode and they're just horny, they'll just go for it, or is there some sort of trick to it?
It depends on the individual. Sometimes you just get two animals that have very, very strong breeding responses and they will just mate with anything. But that's just down to the simple individual. Sometimes you need to do a little bit of trickery involved. You can put in things like different sheds from the target species. Say, like if you've got a pair of corns and you want the male to breed to a female Cali, put the female corn shed in with the female Cali so it smells like a corn, and sometimes it'll work. Or the other way is you can have a pair of each species, introduce each pair to the pure species, watch for the breeding behavior, and when they're about to try and lock, just pull the target animal out and put it on the target female. And that way, normally by that point, they're
They're
in such
committed.
breeding mode, they don't care. They're just complete blinkers. They just want to mate. So then they don't actually care what they mate with.
Mm. Do you find that now you're down the line with the hybrids just they just pair?
For the most part, yes, because when you start getting into like bloodlines and things, so say if I had like a imperial tried to breed to a Pueblo cross corn snake, because those animals share half or more of the same species blood type, their pheromones generally match up quite well, and you can breed them like a pure species. So anything like half corn, they just breed like you're pairing two pure corn snakes together. So
Hmm.
there isn't normally any real issues anymore, and especially in my hybrid groups, that because it's quite diverse, but there is also a lot of crossover. The stuff generally breeds quite nicely to each other.
Because I'm thinking like with things like 25%, 25%, 10%, 10%, 15, at that point when it's so like mixed, would they just go at it to each other anyway?
There's there's no real reason that they shouldn't, but equally, you're still dealing with
Depends.
individual animals. That
Mm.
because I've got quite an interesting project of mine, which I have a four-way equal cross of Pueblo milk, desert king, corn snake, and emery rat snake. So king, corn, milk, rat in equal distribution, and the results from that clutch were way different to what I thought. So I've got a pair that I'm raising up, and this behavior patterns between the two individuals that I've got, they're very different. And even like the growth rates, again, very, very different. And they've both got really good feeding responses, just that the male I have is growing significantly faster than the female. I don't know why that is yet, but it's an interesting thing to have around and see what occurs. Both animals are still healthy, just that one's deciding to put on weight better than the other.
The other thing that I wanted to tackle was that some people think that because, like, if you produce hybrids, then you ruin blood. Like, if you're producing corn and Cali, and you produce like a Cali corn or whatever you want to call it,
The jungle
then
corn, yeah.
yeah, that, and then for some reason they're like they forget that you can have a line of corns and a line of Calis, and then take some from the middle line, cross it, produce the hybrids, and carry on with the pure things. That like, because you've crossed things, that everything's just like mud. There's a weird thing of that.
That makes zero sense.
It doesn't, but like that's. Have you encountered that attitude, Ellie?
Yeah, I feel like people are like purists and they're like, oh, it's ruined it. Like, how have you ruined the individual? Like, it's still the individual.
You haven't. That
Yeah.
unless in a rare instance you get, say, a retained sperm from the clutch, that individual's still going to carry on and breed with pure corn snakes, for instance, and produce pure corn snakes. That just doesn't make any sense. And if you're producing hybrids reliably enough, you should be able to visually tell that, okay, that is from a retained breeding, that one isn't.
And also, if you really were that worried, you could have the hybrid cross, then do another pairing and be like, there is potential that there was retained, and just be honest. And then the next one, it should be just completely like done because the
Here in
retained
the pipes.
gone now.
Potentially, yes. But even this year, I had produced a baby that was from retained sperm that had to be 2 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because she was a snake that I bought as a hatchling from my friend AJ Hayden. I raised it up myself, so I know that this animal is exactly where it came from. I bred it one time to an animal that contained albinism, and then that's because, again, I can trace the lineage of everything. After 2 seasons, I've had a random albino pop up. Is the only logical explanation that it's from retained breeding 2 years ago.
See that I think that is what people worry about, because they're like, oh, it seeps into the corn line rather than it just like, yeah, I guess I understand their concern. But then as long as you're keeping track and you're honest about what you're doing, I guess.
This is the problem, that there are still some people out there that will breed hybrids that will say, well, it's a cross between this and that. Okay, great, but how much of each? Don't know. At that point, why are you doing it? You're just trying to breed random things to each other. I mean, I'd probably go to a slightly geeky extent of it where I backtrack absolutely everything. I can tell you the percentage or theoretical percentage blood of everything in my collection that is, deemed a hybrid. So I can verify everything. Whereas, some people out there won't. And because they don't want to go to the effort, and that's down to them.
Do you still produce like? I know you're known as the hybrid guy, but I've seen you also say like you're doing like you're working with Stewarts or this or that. So will you still produce like lines of animals that you want to like that are typical, like the normal stuff that you don't cross at all? You just keep them to themselves.
Oh yeah, I've got quite a substantial group of Honduran milks that, okay, I'll occasionally use the odd individual for certain hybrid projects, but fundamentally, a Honduran group is my Honduran group. I work that as a completely separate entity to my hybrids.
I suppose because naturally people just want to breed, don't they? So they want a pair of them, and then it's like another thing, I guess.
But that's where it gets exciting, because that's why the hybrids are so much fun to breed, because the outcomes are so unpredictable.
So I don't want. I just want to produce cows. That's what I want to stay cow.
I mean, if that instead, take it your own way. If you want to produce, a bright red striped pituophus milksnake, you carry on. Might take you 10 years, but if you want to craft your own, in your eyes, perfect animal, go ahead and do it. Because as time's moving on, and the more that I'm seeing people crossing different things, scientifically, it seems that most things, within reason are compatible. So yeah, you want to go take, for instance, take a lavender striped corn, put it to a Thai beauty with Pituophis blood and a bit of Honduran because you think the outcome of that will be some crazy looking striped purple giant bull snakey type thing. Cool. You carry on. Just be honest about what you're making.
It's a shame we don't have like fixing snakes like we do dogs, because like you could produce something we like, well, that's really muddy, it's not for my project, so it's gonna have to leave. Because you're faced with either saying, oh, it's pet only in hope, or you cull it, or if in the dog world you could just like get it spayed and then you're like, wait, it can't breed, and I'm absolutely fine with that. But then the hemipenes and stuff grow back, don't they, in the snakes?
Not too sure on that front. I've never known a snake that's had a hemipenes removed. But yeah, I suppose there comes a point where you can theoretically do that, but it's a far more invasive operation.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
problem, isn't it?
yeah.
It's interesting. Like I think there could be a future in like 200 years where we've got breeds of snakes, because that's like the age of the hobby now, the same way that we did with dogs. But like it takes so long. But then also it should be faster because we you can house more snakes than you can dogs traditionally. You know what I mean, Ellie?
Hmm. Yeah. It's easier to have 30 individuals that are in a box than 30 dogs running around.
I mean, even if you don't want to do racks, like, and you're doing like, because I would do it in enclosures, but like if I wanted to have like a row of like 4x2 enclosures for a project, you can if you really want to, you know. I think sometimes a lot of people just at odds of like they want to have the Noah's Ark collection and do it, and that's why they're like, whoa, I can't fit. But if you wanted to just do like, I want to breed this breed, then you technically could. There's no reason why you couldn't work with those cows or like an imperial like look that you like and try and lock that in the same way that the dog people do. I mean, like if we look at the guy that produced those Presa Canarios, they started from another breed, didn't they, Ellie? And a lot of the dog breeds start from another breed, and then you take genes that you want and lock it into your own line and line breed it that way. There's no difference. You don't take the Imperials, you take what you want and take it and lock in genes this way and take it another way and produce your own breed from a breed from a breed, because that's how dogs work.
Yeah, there's no reason why that shouldn't be possible. And there's no reason that ethically that there's anything wrong with what you're doing as long as you're being honest and upfront about it. It's simply that our reptile hobby has this weird thing where if you don't follow the trend of what people are supposed to believe, you're suddenly villainized about it. And I'm sitting here going, well, actually, no. There's nothing to be villainized about this. Simply that you're telling me that this is wrong, but can you tell me why? Quite often, the arguments that are against hybrids, they're fundamentally flawed.
Yeah, I mean, like the way that me and Eddie, like, I used to be like, again, like my opinions changed, and now I start thinking about the domestication, things like that, and I'm like, actually, like, it just makes sense in a way, and you can do both. There's no like, arguably, you're also producing lines and breeds when you're doing like pure stuff as well, because like Jalisco at that point, like that's like a breed, right? Because like
Yeah.
it doesn't exist anymore, so you're just producing like a hobby form thing that conforms to an idea of what you want it to be, and it's at that point a breed. So. And then the idea of breed, people will be like, well, breeds don't exist in herpetoculture, so you're making shit up and it's stupid, and they get like, really annoyed about it. But I'm like, when you think about it, it's just naming convention of like grouping together like genetics.
That's it. Breeds don't exist in herpetoculture because people are telling you that they don't. But how come in other hobbies surrounding animals where it's exactly the same basic principles, breeds exist? Because in that circle, people believe that breeds exist, whereas for some reason in our circle, people don't. And there's simply because there's this weird, like, clicky thing about because you don't believe that, that makes it right or wrong. It's
I mean, like
confusing.
when I've worked in shops and stuff, and people will be like, "Oh yeah," and like there's loads of different breeds, and then the people in the worked in shops would be like, "Actually, it's species." But then, like technically, those like false water cobras you got over there for sale, they have drifted apart from what is actually in the wild, right? Unless you're actually getting like actual gene transfer coming in from the wild stuff that's keeping it it technically is on its way to becoming breeds, you know?
Yeah, that's. I think it's both because herpetoculture, as if you're comparing it to dog breeding, herpetoculture is like a brand new newborn baby in terms of lifespan. It's so new because it's for the masses. It's been around, say, 80s and since the 80s, 90s. Okay, yes, people have been keeping reptiles since 30s and 40s, but as herpetoculture as we know it per se has been kind of born around the sort of 80s and 90s, especially when the big ball python boom happened. That's where sort of people will kind of look at herpetoculture as day dot, whereas it spans a bit further back.
It's way older than that. Have you
Oh,
ever
yeah.
read Bateman's The Barbarian? The
I can't
really
say I
old.
have, but
So
it like
in that, it was like 1897 or something, and he talks about you can get like milk snakes at the market for 50 shillings, and you can get like king snakes for £1. So we've technically been keeping, and corn snakes as well. So we've been keeping these things in the UK for 120 odd years. Like whether it's been herpetoculture and producing lines and doing what we're doing now, the culturing and like proliferation is on a different level nowadays. But we've always we've had them for like 120 years. That's
yeah.
crazy.
It's the bizarre thing though that when you say about herpetoculture, because it's like the fourth biggest pet demographic, past under cats, dogs, and fish. It's
It's more than like guinea pigs and rabbits and stuff in the UK,
yeah,
I think.
guinea pigs, rabbits, horses, and everything. But it seems to be one of the most misunderstood and one of the most, I wouldn't even say controversial, just even within our own community, different opinions and different moral looks on it.
Well, I mean, like I I used to be a lot more hot-headed than I am now about things. Like, I wouldn't even entertain this conversation like 3 years ago. So, and like for me, my word for 2025 is pragmatism. Like, I'm trying to practice pragmatism more and more because actually, like, I find me now would disagree with me 3 years ago. So, I think people need to chill out and just stop and pause and let it simmer and then sleep on it and then just let it simmer a little bit more and then think about it. Because like when I actually think about things now, like people might be surprised that we're having this conversation because I don't like Rex, but they think that therefore you must hate each other because you have different ideals, right? But we're having a lovely conversation about hybrids, and it's just a conversation. But
We're all people that share the same passion fundamentally at the end of the day, whether I like hybrids and Lamprocaltus, if I keep in racks, I also keep in vivs, whether you keep, everything bioactive, whether you're a retic guy, whether you're a ball python guy, we're still all reptile people. I don't even care if you're into, beardies, geckos, frogs, whatever. Doesn't matter. We're still people that share a passion about animals, and there's no harm in having a conversation. Because
yeah,
expressing different people's viewpoints, that's fundamentally part of human society. Whereas you can disagree at the end of it, but it's fantastic that you've heard someone else's point.
yeah, I mean, this is why I like things like the AL and stuff because it's such a good defense for people that want to like use racks and stuff and do it as a job and blah 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 blah. And also like you can stop moaning about it as well. Like I feel no need to moan about the racks when if someone's got an AL, I'm like right, well that's the AL's problem to like slowly inch you forward, like off you pop. But also if you've got an AL, you're like, don't moan at me if you're using racks. I'm conforming to the minimum standards. If you've got a problem, go complain to the AL. And the AL was like like it's slowly moving. So like I think things like that, it just chills things out because like there's not really much to moan about. I mean, you're like, well, it's just not my problem. It will like it's been governed, you know?
I think people take too much of a moral standpoint themselves on those aspects. Of fundamentally, there is a governing body that has determined that that is okay, and so if the governing body is saying that that is okay, who is John Smith from down the road to say that it isn't? It's just simply down to people's moral compass. That I've got vivs myself, and there are animals of mine that I keep as part of my breeding projects, consider vivariums, because I don't deem that they're suitable for racks, but also I do with animals that are because they're perfectly comfortable in the environment they're in. Just because it's a rack doesn't make it wrong. It's still simply it's a box. Whether it's a viv or a rack, it's still a box that animal is happy in.
Well, me and Ellie would disagree with you on that one, but yeah, but it's good that we can like still have like you can just have a, like back to the point of what you were saying about people like so het up and like they can't just have conversations and stuff, and like in other things of like dogs and stuff, like the dog industry, like you have like these cliques and stuff. We have like the groomers and the trainers, and then the working dogs, but like. Would you say they're at each other's throats as much as herpetoculture, Ellie?
Yeah.
Okay, well that's just human nature.
Yep.
Fuck up this conversation. It's just how humans work. There you go.
Yeah,
Like,
fundamentally, humans will try and find a way to argue with each other for some reason, apparently.
It's just what we are, isn't it? Because we're not meant to be in this whole like globalist thing genetically. It's like little tribalist groups that would war with each other, but like we've got to transcend above that, I guess.
I'd agree with you.
When we're producing things like MBKs and stuff, you can look in like books and you can be like, typically if this species has this number of like this clutch size on average and stuff. When you're so far down the line, you're producing something that's like 10%, blah blah blah. Do you have no idea what the clutch size is going to be until you get certain records for females that you can predict after that?
See, I've had very, very interesting experience with that myself because part of the collection that I inherited from my friend Lucas, he had Ruthcorns, so Ruthven's kingsnake cross cornsnake, had two different lines of it. One line was produced from a female Ruthven's king, and one line was produced from a female cornsnake. The fecundity of those two individual females was wildly different. The female that was produced from female corn originally, she laid more cornsnake type clutches, smaller eggs, larger size. She laid about 14, 15 eggs, but of all quite small sizes. The female that was originally from Ruthven's king, she laid small kingsnake type clutches. So she was laying 5, 6 eggs, but they were substantially larger. And that is simply that you can breed for fecundity, and depending on what female type you use, because say like a jungle corn, you've produced originally from female corn, she'll produce larger clutches. Whereas using from female king, she'll produce the smaller but larger kingsnake type eggs. And I have found that happens time and time and time again.
So you can almost gear it to like that as well.
It's entirely possible because I'd say I deem I've got enough experience with myself to see that it's fully possible.
What about incubation? Do you just kind of go for like a generalist ballpark when you know?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Everything is about 27 degrees and it takes about 60 days, give or take.
So the idea of like creating a new breed and like gearing it behaviorally, that interests me. More so the behavior than anything. Because you can be preference into things. Let's say you had like a clutch of hatchling X and you had like two faunariums. One was like aspen shaving and one was like soil. And then you had a clutch and the ones that would always shift across to the shavings one, you bred from them. You could technically breed preference for shavings into a line. Things like that interest me because you're making like pets that like also prefer generalist pet conditions as well.
Yeah.
You think about where you could be in like 50 years time. You could produce like really cool stuff.
Well, in the same sort of vein that again, my friend Lucas, who was a very, very smart fella, from when he was doing hybrids properly himself, even to a point that he was seeing that his own results breeding for things like feeding response. Whereas animals that he produced from babies that fed straight off the bat would produce animals that, again, the hatchlings fed straight off the bat. If there's certain animals which were, finicky feeders or needed sometimes assist feeding to get going, they were going to, again, produce animals that had poor feeding responses. So you'd pick and choose from the animals that had the best feeding responses, the best behavior, best clutches, and it's simply just a case of picking and choosing. And you can actually work those traits down into the offspring that you're producing yourself.
And you're proving type at that point. Like, yeah. I love the idea of taking on this like dog stuff of breeding and horse stuff of breeding, combine it with herpetoculture. And it's like so fresh to herpetoculture because a lot of people in herpetoculture are like, they're just not stepping up into that upper gear of, you know what I mean?
That's it. Is that who's to say, why can't we do this sort of stuff? Who's to say why we can't? Because herpetoculture says we can't.
It's dogma.
But then it's a case of herpetoculture says we can't, but why?
It's like forcing you into these narrow lanes of thought. It's like you can't come outside those bounds.
That's it. It's questioning why you can't do something, and then listening to the argument against it. Because more often than not, I found the arguments against them are quite poor.
Yeah, I understand people's concerns, but as long as everyone tries their best to keep things separate and you don't ruin someone else's hobby for them, because I've got a friend who wanted to produce just like wild type corn snakes, and there are just corn snakes, and then when he produced it, a load of like albinism and stuff came out, and he was like really upset about it. So I understand with things like that because people were like, "Oh, that's not what I wanted to do with my project," and it's kind of been ruined for them. But that's because people have been. That's not even hybrids. That's just like morphs
Yeah.
in like genetics. So like that's going to happen whether it's a hybrid or not. But that
But
just
also,
means you got to like source from people that be careful and honest with you.
that can happen though if you get two wild individuals, because palmettos were found in the wild.
That's true.
So, and so is albinism. So this purest form of only producing wild type looking animals is quite difficult because even wild populations sometimes can't.
The sun is really doing a number on you, isn't it?
No.
Just slightly glowing. You wanted the south-facing room. There you go.
Yeah, Ellie is choosing to channel the Casper vibes today, apparently.
Just glowing. Yeah. Well, is there anything you want to talk about, Ellie? Because I know I'm like getting excited and taking over the conversation. So
No, not really. I think we've pretty much covered a lot of the things that I wanted to talk about.
cool. I mean, you're literally under the spotlight. So there you go.
Whoa, it's getting even brighter.
Can't even see your face anymore.
Over the last hour and a half, she's just been gradually disappearing.
No,
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of like what you can do with it.
my thought process is like you want to produce really friendly Cali Kings, but what if you found really nice, like we know corn snakes are really nice, really temperament wise. Generally, you get one random one that has a bit of an issue.
Yeah, I had one like that.
Yeah, I've had a corn snake that was a little bit temperamental.
Yeah, he was the most evil thing going.
But what if you produced Callies with a bit of corn snake in it, and they were the best like Callies because of temperament wise? Like, what does it matter? Or are you gonna struggle to get that friendly Callie just on its own, or would you be better trying a different route? I don't know. Like,
Well, I
yeah,
could do both, right? I could just keep my Cali line pure and then like do another experimental thing. I mean, what I'm thinking is like you get US blood in of like these chiller, more outcrossed Calis, and then you work with that, and you start like if it's an Aggie bastard, it goes, and then you start getting.
I think in that case, it's simply, like you say, it's just outcrossing in generations because Callies in the US are worked with far more than over here. That I'm talking a complete bullshit theory in all honesty, but theoretically, they are far more generations removed from the wild than the ones that we have are. So, you deem that people aren't going to want to keep and breed the animals that are more difficult to work with. So they generally have quite a nice disposition. And I suppose that's where it is that they're just that bit further ahead than we are. And there's nothing wrong with jumping upon their successes and their multi-generations further across and, pull from their success and bring it over.
Yeah, I mean, I also have friends that like herp in California and stuff, and they say like the ones they pick up in the wild, they don't even like bite and I'm like, that's so wild to me because like
maybe it's just a case of a few talking back a few years that the US just sent us all their grumpy, angry stuff and just went, right, you can take that, you have that lot.
I think it's also a case of like we don't really value corns that much, Callies that much in the UK because of the price wise. So logistically, the value of spending money on an import for something that no one cares about isn't really there. So maybe we've just gone in over time, even if it's like from one from Newcastle to one in like Exeter. Still, the population's what it is. We're still slowly coming in. So I suppose
it takes that slightly batshit individual to go, no one cares about that, I'm going to go work with it. That's kind of what I went and did.
Yeah, I mean, one of the snakes I've bought is it's either his parents or grandparents that were US imports, through Neil Little, who then it went to Ryan Devaney, who produced the offspring that I've just bought. So I
Yeah,
could track it back to like fresh blood.
I know Neil Little very, very well. we get on a lot. We speak most days.
Yeah, I've spoken to Neil a few times. I bought some things from him, like equipment and whatnot. Um, I like the speckleds. I'd like to get speckleds, but I'm not a fan of the yellows. I like it when they're black and white. What is with the black and white in me? But like, you see some ones in the wild where it's like black and white specks. I'm like, oh, I like it. Whereas like people have gone for yellow, so the UK population is very like yellow by default, I guess.
Yeah, you're sadly you've kind of built a rock in your own back there. That you're trying to find the thing that most people don't desire in this country. So
Weird, isn't it?
you have to go to the lengths of importing stuff. That's just simple as. If that's what you want, people will go to the lengths of it.
Yeah, because to me, I'm like, well, it makes Desert Kings in the high yellow speckles very like close to my mind. I'm
See,
like,
I really wish that someone had out there a line of really, really high white speckled Mexican blacks. See, that to me would be interesting because I'm not a big fan of monochrome animals in general. But if there was, it was like a line red calico type look, that to me would be really cool. Just that, again, herticulture, they've bred out and out and out and out and out to get pure black MBKs. So surely there's got to be someone out there that's gone the other way and gone, right, I'm going to make speckly ones instead.
yeah, I mean, I've got a really interesting Cali that I bought where it's like a black Cali and then it's got this like brown cream like stripe, but it's got two bulbs overhead and it looks like a femur, the femur, like cartoon femur. And it's
Oh,
got a
cool.
couple of those down its back. So I'm like, I've grabbed that and I'm like, see what that's going to look like when it's older. Whether it like expands and stretches out and doesn't look like that anymore. But I see, but like that could be cool if you have like this like skeleton like line thing going on.
But this is it. You've just got to pick and choose what you want to work with and then run with it. If that sounds like a very interesting individual, and if you want to, put some effort into that, great. It's deemed what forget monetary value, and you've got to look at how much you value that. I
Hmm.
mean, I've imported hybrids myself from overseas because I wanted that individual. Are the offspring going to be worth a ton of money? Probably not. But I want to work that project, and if I need to import an animal for it, it's what you've got to go and do.
We've
Would
had
you say
this,
oh, Garrett?
yeah, we've had this conversation for years. And I've always said to him, just like follow what your heart wants. Just get something that you're going to really like. It doesn't matter. And he's always been like, no, no. And then like just recently, we've had a change of heart, which is nice.
I've had a FOMO though, because
Yeah.
like I love Lamprey
Me too.
fucking love Lamprey.
I've always been a Lamprey guy, and I don't think I've ever. My first snake was an Arizona Mountain King. I don't think I've ever not had Lamprey in my entire history of keeping reptiles.
Yeah, because I love them, and like I always think about what I want. I always think about another Lamprey, but like there's also the if I fill up my entire collection with one thing, am I getting a bit of FOMO of I haven't experienced something that might also be like I love it more than Lamprey, you know? So like there's a bit of FOMO, but then lately I've been like
There's
just
that element of like, is the grass always greener?
yeah. So lately I've been like, do you know what? Just accept that you like king snakes, and that's why I bought more Callies because I was like, just accept it,
Yeah,
just accept it.
you work with what you enjoy. That's all it is. That's why I've done it. I mean, my partner, she when we first met, she was genuinely terrified of snakes. Being with someone that is, a reptile breeder, I introduced her to the world of it, and she's now far more into ball pythons. It might not be my thing, but I support her goals and everything, and I've been around the reptile industry long enough to, have a somewhat of an idea as to what genetics, are to work with and what things, visually look nice in the results. And I've guided her to a degree, but also she's picked her own path and chosen what she wants to work with herself.
Mm.
It's just finding what you enjoy. That's all it is.
Things like the Mexicana complex that want a little bit more like lizard and then diet. Have you produced hybrids of those? Like you do Thera,
I
don't
haven't
you? So
produced any, but I do have a couple of hybrids. I've got a Pueblan cross Mex, I do have a female fair eye that I have kicking around for certain projects, and I've also got a male Mex cross Pueblan Nelsons.
Do you find that the offspring take to rodents easier because they've been outcrossed to something that would eat them easier?
To be honest, I find that most of the stuff that I work with eats rodents anyway. Even the whole Mex complex stuff, they just eat rodents. Most stuff that I work with does. There's very few animals I have to try any sort of scent trickery with, but if the odd stuff that does, it goes eventually. They always do, and they're fine on rodents. Even things like all the pyros and pyrocorns and things like that, I find that they eat rodents pretty much straight off the bat. I generally don't have much issue with the stuff I work with.
I remembered. Oh my God.
Hey!
So when we're talking about like breeds and stuff,
Yeah.
I always think about we've been keeping these like snakes for like 120 years in the UK, right? Back that long. Like it reminds me of like the cattle and the rare breed stuff, where like no one really keeps it, but it's got such a cultural significance to herpetoculture in the UK. And it almost like to me, I draw this comparison to the rare breed stuff where it's not actually commercially viable because it's not like the big production animals, but it's like they want to like keep it around for like the historical cultural sake, right?
Yeah.
And that's how I feel with like the Stuarts, and like I'd never see wild type Stuarts. It's always like an aberrant or something. But like I always wonder if like with king snakes we could do some sort of like rare breeds thing where people like work together to like maintain these things that like no one else cares about but us, you know? Because that's kind of what the rare breeds in
You
cattle
could
is.
say
No
that a
one...
lot about the unusual species in herpetoculture in general. I mean, like you say, that when do you see a normal wild type Stewart's milks? There's very, very few and far between. I was fortunate enough to actually pick one up that was from it's traceable wild caught Stewart's milk. That animal is now, I did part it as part of a trade deal, but I can verify that there is at least one in this country. And I found there was another fella who did have some down in Jersey. He's got a pair.
Harry Newton.
Yes, Harry.
Yeah.
It was a bit back and forth of I wanted him to tell him my male, and he wanted my female. You know, usual stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But no, there's some. It's just about finding those passionate people, because if you truly do want a wild type Stewart's milk, you'll go to the lengths to find one and import it from wherever you need to get it, because you value that animal regardless of the monetary value. It doesn't really matter.
I mean, what was amazing I bought some helmeted chameleons and we went to see this lady and she was in love with Bombina. And to keep the bloodline pure, she had imported these Bombina from Europe, and she had a German line and a Czech Republic line, and these animals were worth like £12. Like, but her passion was there, and she had these amazing Bombina, and it just it was really inspiring to me because I was like, that is just pure passion.
That's what I found, is that passion shines through regardless of what you're doing. That if you have a really, really intense passion for this, like you say, £12 gecko, people all around the world, providing that you put it in people's faces, will take notice and go, that's the lady that you need to speak to about this strange, unusual species. Same with me and the hybrids. I am really passionate about what I do. Just because someone else doesn't deem it as a value doesn't mean that it isn't. And that attitude is shifting. I'm selling some hybrids for, relatively okay sums of money in terms of like a normal run-of-the-mill person who works a full-time job. That I don't make any money from this. I put it back into my animals. But just because someone says somewhere that hybrids aren't worth anything doesn't mean that they're not, because I'm selling them and people are making, some really, really nice animals out there that are worth, £500, £600, £700. And people are buying them because there are people out there that look at that and go, I want it. Just because someone says that animal isn't valuable doesn't mean they're not. Who deems that animal not valuable? It's bizarre in this in herpetoculture that how come, say, someone deems a Boland's python worth tens of thousands of pounds, but someone deems a carpet python worth 50? That just down to supply and demand.
That's the way it should be. It should be about because you love it and that's it. I've got this weird, unhealthy mindset of being like, the one being there, working with my £12.50 frogs, and no one else really cares. And I'm doing my thing, and then someone else is like, that's nice. Bit of a muppet. All right. Like, do you know what I mean? I'm like, oh,
I suppose that it just simply boils down to personal ethics at that point. That woman is really, really passionate about this one specific thing. Good for them, because people like that are what keep species alive in this hobby. Keeping species alive is just as important to some people as, breeding these new brand fancy morphs. And that's where they find their passion. And it's no one should shit on people for the passion that they have for whatever they do, because passion will shine through. If someone is truly passionate about ball pythons, good for you. Just because they're popular doesn't mean you can't be passionate about it. Just because something's not popular doesn't mean you can't be passionate about it either.
I think the only time it ruins things for people is like the ball python like market crash. If you start breeding royals now, you can't shift them, and they're just going into rescue, and you're like, well, people that have mass produced have actually just ruined it for me.
I can understand that though. The few ball pythons that my partner worked with, we're producing such low volumes that we're not going to impact on anyone. We don't have the room to be producing large numbers of a popular species. But she enjoys it. She's producing things of her own, accord. And the stuff that she likes, there is a certain amount of a market value in it. But it's not about that. It's simply because my partner Jodie really does like these sorts of things. That's all it is.
If it was more like that, we wouldn't have like this race to the bottom, like spewing out 1,000 pound animals and then just like dumping them.
I think it's because, obviously with how genetics work, they're chasing that one thing. You've got your target production, and then essentially you have byproduct, and it's the byproduct that becomes the problem. If things, especially in like the ball python game, things being produced reliably, then you wouldn't have so much byproduct. You wouldn't have these animals that trickle down and end up in rescues, which, yeah, that's fine. But I guess harking back to the whole hybrid thing, that's where I stem in the stuff that I'm working with. There isn't this massive production of it, so there isn't this massive overproduction. That's why there is a demand for it, because the people that want it, they're out there and they're buying it, but they're then keeping it.
Would you say you have very low byproduct as well because of the fact that like everything comes out looking so different and nice?
Yeah, very. I don't even deem it as byproduct. It's simply a case of it's how hybrid breeding works. And if it is a byproduct animal as such, half the time I end up keeping it because it's not something that I want to bleed into bloodlines, like you say. It's about not overproducing for yourself. If I bred 300 babies, didn't sell a single one of them, I'll still keep them because I know that I can keep that sort of volume of animals, and then you wouldn't breed the next year because you're then still dealing with animals that are alive that need care. It's not for you to deem that animal is not worthy of a life. So you've got to be able to work with what you in your own capacity. But no,
I mean, like, would you generally produce like 300, or is that just a high amount that you said as an example?
it is an example, but I theoretically could. I've got 35 females that can go next year. So, if all of those produce properly, and some of my animals do double clutch without any further breeding and no second attempts or anything. So it is a theoretical number that is possible for me to do, but all of my equipment and everything is geared up to house a few hundred babies with all the adults. And if those animals need care, those animals need care. It's just it's not for you to devalue that animal's life.
Do you feed different lines differently, or is it all just kind of every 7 days?
I'll kind of keep things a bit more streamlined. That I'll do babies every 5 days, grow-ons and adults every 7, just to keep things a little bit easier. But everything grows at a nice rate, and I'm not dealing with stuff that has really, really fast metabolisms or stuff that needs to be fed like 1 huge meal a month. It's just everything's kind of tailored to have very, very similar needs.
Well, we're hitting up to like the 2 hour mark, and I know that at 12 you need to go.
I start my day job at 1 o'clock. That's why.
Yeah, right. Yeah, fair. So is there anything that you want to get in, Ellie, before obviously we let him go?
No, I'm really happy.
Well, thank you very much for coming on. Anyway, I really enjoyed this conversation, and
You're welcome.
you are one of the people that I wanted to have on the podcast for a long time because, like Ellie said, we come up and you're like, oh, look at that, and it's like hybrid. It's really cool. So I really wanted to get to the meat and potatoes of like what you're thinking, what your goals are, and like all the controversy. I wanted to hear it from your perspective because I always hear it being like, oh, that's awful, blah blah blah. And I've never been like, oh yeah, that means that it's just like horrendous. I've always wanted to like explore it because I like the look of the cows. The cow.
Yeah.
What is the cow? I keep saying cow. What's in it?
I know that you're talking about the cow Pueblan, imperial that I made. It is simply an imperial Pueblan. That's all it is. From a full stripe pos het albino male to a het albino female. There's nothing more to it. It just happened that random individual popped out.
Oh, do you reckon you can like recreate it and lock it in?
I'd like to. I do want to try an element of line breeding with those sorts of things, but do it in a responsible way. That I've now got to produce an animal from a different line that has a similar phenotype, and then try and run with it. But that cow one, when that popped out, that was one of those that sort of looked at and went, "Oh, that's cool."
It's really, really cool. I like it a lot. I'm excited to see what you're going to do. Like, I'm definitely going to keep tabs and see what you produce. If you start like looking in those cows, I'm going to be like, right, I'm buying some.
Well, there's stuff that I talk about publicly and stuff that I don't. I've got a couple of things ticking away next year in the background that if it works, it's going to be something special. But I don't want to talk about it until I've done it because where's the fun in that?
Fair. Right. Well, again, like, love this conversation. I'm so glad we had you on. Can you let everyone know where to find you if we haven't said your name enough times?
Yeah, of course. So I would operate under the banner of Milksnake Mutations. You can find us on, Facebook, Instagram, all the usual things. It's all just Milksnake Mutations. But yeah, I don't really think there's anything more to say from my point.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much, mate.
You're most welcome, guys. I'm really glad you had me on, and I hope that this conversation sparks some interesting things for your own selves to think about as well.